So the existing infrastructure we have in place is there's the existing railroad culverts that's shown in green on the bottom there. There's the existing B branch sewer that comes in from the top of the screen. And then on the top right is where the upper B branch is, and that's where water flows now, and all has to flow through those existing railroad culverts. The proposed improvements, we're going to increase the capacity of the culverts that take water from the upper B branch, build a transition structure, which just is an area where the water from the upper B branch will combine with the B branch storm sewer that still does drain parts of the city. And then it'll flow both into the existing box culverts, but also the proposed culverts to be tunneled under the railroad tracks. And then there'll be an outfall structure where the water will flow into the lower B branch creek. And how we're going to do that under the railroad tracks is through a process called micro-tunneling, so that we'll be able to install these culverts and the railroad will be able to do completely without any disruption to the railroad operation on the surface. So the property we need to acquire to do that, this is showing the majority of it. We've acquired all the property, or at least we've agreed to terms with all property owners except with the railroad, Canadian Pacific Railroad. And the area in tan is kind of showing where we're going through with our project. And so this just kind of outlines we're seeking 2 permanent easements for the improvements and then some temporary ones to help us ease for our contractor during construction. In order for the railroad to allow us to enter onto their property, they're requiring a series of agreements. So one would be the service agreement, which we've had in place for since 2015, I believe. Then the construction agreement that's before you tonight, and also the easement agreements and the environmental right of access agreements. So in talking with the railroad and just kind of go over some of the points of discussion that we've had with them and some of the things that they were asking for early on that we've actually been able to work with them on. One of them, an engineering issue, was at first they were requiring that we weld all the joints for these steel pipes that we tunnel into the railroad. So this would really impact the schedule and how long it would take a contractor to build something. We were able to work with them, and they're now approving our use of these mechanical joints, which go much faster. You basically just push pipes together, and away you go. They were also prohibiting construction from November 15th to April 15th. They're worried about frozen ballast, any settlement that might happen in the winter. And so they've kind of limited that to say we can work anytime if it's more than 25 feet from the tracks. Basically, if it's not impacting the structural integrity of the tracks, we can do what we need to do. And then they're open even to a window outside that time frame, depending on how weather conditions are. Talks about tunneling activity under mainline tracks when in use. So we have to tunnel about 150 to 180 feet. And so the original one was, we'd have to, the entire time we're going through, we might be under the mainline track and 30 feet beyond it, but if a train came, we'd have to stop our operation till the train was through, and then we'd have to start it again. For now, as long as we're beyond that zone of influence of that one mainline track, we can continue while trains are going overhead. So we're only required when the cutting edge, so when that tunneling machine is under the actual mainline track or the zone of influence of that mainline track. They're also restricting kind of some of our shoring methods to make sure that, when we build these trenches, but they accepted, tight sheeting, a very common practice with, as long as we're outside 25 feet from the tracks. The other one was concerns with how long it would take CP to review submittals of change orders that might come up during the project. And so, you can understand we're building something under their tracks. If something bad happens, whether it's our fault or their fault, they're going to be involved. And so you can understand why, they're going to want to know what we're doing under their tracks. So this isn't an unreasonable request to, being on change orders. What we're concerned about was, how long am I taking to review, and if they're looking at every single change order, it would really drag out the process. But they agreed that this would only apply to elements, again, impacting railroad loading. So does it have anything to do with the support of the railroad tracks itself? If it doesn't, then it's not their concern. There were a couple of legal issues outside of engineering, and one had to do with ownership of the existing railroad box culverts. So They were built about 1930 by the railroad and then theirs, and they've been maintaining it. It's been their responsibility. So generally, we wouldn't want to take over maintenance or ownership or liability of something if we didn't have to. And so that was our initial position. But first thing we wanted to understand, well, what's the condition of these box culverts if we did take them over? And so we did a condition assessment, had them dry it out and inspected, and as you can see on the left there, they almost look brand new. So they're actually in really, really good condition. And Strand IAW, the engineering design team, concluded that the twin box culverts are in good condition and suitable to convey stormwater, basically saying there's nothing that we need to do structurally anytime soon to, as far as if we take over ownership. Now, I remember I mentioned that we took some public input as part of this process, and we asked for hopes and fears. Well, it just so happens one of the hopes was that the improvements include another railroad crossing, because if you're from that area or live in that area or have traveled through that area, when a train is shown, if they were parked where that red is, the two green locations, one at Fengler Street on the top of the screen and the one down kind of by the south part of the Millwork District, those would be the only places you could actually cross over the tracks and get to the riverside. And they're over 1.5 miles apart. And so trying to get a way to get pedestrian traffic at a minimum through there was something that citizens really were interested in. And so the other thing that IAW concluded was the box culverts are suitable to provide passage for pedestrians and bicycles. In addition to that, they looked at, in addition to the condition, they looked at, well, what's the feasibility of creating a American with Disability Act compliant trail through there, and they found that they could actually accomplish that as part of the project. And so this is kind of what it would look like with the trail system, with the culverts and the outfall. So this would be looking, if you're on Garfield Avenue, looking towards the railroad tracks, looking towards the lower B branch, and you can just make out there's where the existing box culverts are. So you would basically go downhill to go into those box culverts. Just getting a little closer. The one thing here will be the floodgate. So what this is when we have these large rain events, we can open that floodgate, and then we can continue to use those box culverts for flood mitigation as well. And of course, the two box culverts, there'd be one for each direction. There'd be lighting, security cameras, and some work to make them as acceptable bike paths. But most importantly, the system would be able to handle a more than 500-year rainstorm. And this is showing that flooding event.